Awesome. So let's see here. I'll stop sharing there. And perfect. So our presentation today is by Kimberly Miller. She is a somatic experiencing practitioner, a certified neurofeedback provider, an IFS level 2 therapist, an EMDR consultant in training, a brain spotting clinician, and CEO and owner of Neurofeedback Arizona. Kim brings 27 years of experience working in the field. She's an integrative therapist and has learned many different skills while working at the Meadows, a world-renowned treatment center. She's worked and trained with senior fellows at the Meadows on trauma, somatic experiencing, the Meadows model, internal family systems, psychodrama, and many other modalities. Kim was also part of the team that opened the Meadows IOP in Scottsdale, helping with risk management and policy writing, and was also the administrative coordinator. She's been involved in writing many different program materials and has written with senior fellows on projects related to trauma. Kim is a professional writer and owns a private practice and clinic in Tempe and Scottsdale, Arizona. Awesome. So take it away, Kim.
Okay, awesome. Can everybody hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay, and then also I have George Miller on here with me. He is our neurofeedback director. So if at any point I may reach back to him as he's on our panel here as our panelist. Um, so first off, I just wanted to talk a little bit about like our practice, some information. Today we're going to be talking about neurofeedback and brain mapping. I was just going to say that I hope for anybody on here, just know that you shouldn't be expected to remember all of this. The first couple of neurofeedback courses I took, I felt like I was drinking from a giant fire hose. I could not even tell you what they said. So I really don't want anyone to leave feeling kind of like browbeaten. But it's kind of fun to just do an intro to go over the concepts. You guys are welcome to email me with, any questions. Happy to answer. But we have been on about a 10-year journey with this. I started years back with brain paint. I actually learned neurofeedback initially at the Meadows in about 2013. I had no idea even how to take it all in. I just kind of had a computer and I followed direction. But since then we've become certified. We've spent a lot of years really learning, taking a lot of trainings, just to get to this point. And even at this point, I now feel like, I've only just begun. So I think just like anything else with neuroscience, it's just an uphill climb, and it's always changing. Like we don't know everything there is to know about the brain. And I think it just never ends. My idea when I set out was to just have like a truly integrative practice. I think early on I did a lot of substance use, some trauma, but I think over time, what I found is that clients really benefited from not having to be kind of sent out to do a lot of different things. So we started to just kind of make this spokes on the wheel kind of a concept. So clients could have access to EMDR, brain mapping, neurofeedback, and then I added some other trauma modalities. So I kind of describe us as a little bit of an aggressive approach. Like usually people are coming in and they want to do kind of this, 360-degree thing. And I can talk more about our practice at the end, but just to kind of introduce myself, give you a little bit of information about me. And she did a great job. Debbie did a great job with the bio. I just kind of talk about any affiliations. I did some work at Meadows. I've also worked at a couple different places in the Valley. This is kind of like our agenda for today, give or take orientation. I'm going to talk just a little bit about kind of like our story of getting into the field. I just have a quick slide here on uses. Like, what can you use brain mapping and neurofeedback for? Then we're going to talk about brain mapping, neurofeedback, and then questions. Because brain mapping and neurofeedback, it used to confuse me to all avail. Brain mapping is actually different than neurofeedback. They're actually two different trades and two different certifications. So I'll explain what kind of each of those are in simple terms, and then we're going to kind of dive in on it. I wanted to talk really quick about it's really our story. I learned neurofeedback at the Meadows, and then I moved to St. Louis, and I just felt inspired. Like, I really want to do neurofeedback. I want to see how this goes for people. I want to do brain mapping. I felt very new to the game. We also kind of had this approach where we wanted it to be really affordable. There were places where I called and they would say, we need $6,000 down to provide sessions. And I know a lot of my clients just don't, have $6,000 up front, or they can't take it all out in a loan. And this was, many, many years ago. But our mission was to just find a way to kind of help people. So one of our very first client that we had was a young man who had autism, and that's one of the great uses for neurofeedback and brain mapping is there's a lot of really building and mounting research with ADHD and autism, especially. There are a lot of other uses, and I'll go over those in a minute, but this was a young man who was biting his teachers constantly at the principal's office, always in trouble. His mom was just worn down, exhausted, and she had read out an article that neurofeedback was super helpful. So we kind of set out, we did staff with a lot of people, and the most amazing thing happened. I mean, I was kind of open to seeing, how it went. I wasn't sure like how much more we wanted to kind of do that in our practice. But after about month 2 or 3, the mom comes in and she's like, I haven't had like almost a single complaint from his teachers, and they're all asking questions. He's not in trouble anymore. He's not trying to bite people. He's not retreating. There was all these behaviors. They were having such a hard time. And she's like, they're all asking questions. Can I give them your phone number? Because we've just, we've got these kind of treatment resistant problems. We've tried everything. So it was like really beautiful. It was just this moment where it was like, this stuff really works. And I don't even know every detail of all the ins and outs of it. But I remember one of my first mentors, he said, you're going to fall in love with it because it really works. You're just going to love it. And he was a really smart man. So that was kind of our first introduction to it. And that just got us hooked from the beginning. We were like, wow, that's really something. And that is probably about 25% of our clients is autistic clients. I'd say another 25% is ADHD, and then we have chronic pain, trauma, as well as, we're finding more and more and more research and uses for neurofeedback. But just a quick intro. I thought that was just kind of a beautiful story. Here are a lot of the uses. There's even things that you don't readily think of, but there are research articles on each one of these, even sometimes stockpiles of research. I'm in a doctoral program right now, and it really looks like this is a lot the wave of the future. It's the neuroscience, technology, like how do we kind of utilize more cutting edge data and operant conditioning, and how do we kind of help condition our brain? How do we perform better and do better? Because we know mental illness, mental health issues, or even like, different stress disordered responses we have are really brain-based issues. Really, most things are brain-based, right? So anyway, here's a whole bunch of, different areas where we've been able to work with people. Also, the research is there. In my doctoral program, there's just hundreds of studies sitting in the queue. People are just really working this out. A lot of studies are actually moving from inconclusive to more evidence-based. So we're kind of watching something as it's forming too, because we did a lot of pilot studies, but we just didn't know, is it effective? Is it useful? What areas is it useful? And truly we're using it in so many different areas that each one of them has its own kind of data set and study course. So schizophrenia, bipolar, chronic pain, sports performance, ADHD, a lot of the sensory disorders. There's probably sensory disorders too that are just not even fully claimed or marked, right? We think of ADHD or autism as sensory, but there's a lot of other sensory issues that people have as well. Math and focus, dyslexia. This isn't on here, but test taking, speech disorders, TBI, PTSD. TBI is actually training for neurofeedback with TBI has actually been happening for quite a long time. It's one of the main modalities for kind of helping the brain come back online. We're seeing a lot of people for anxiety, traumatic memories, panic disorder. We have some people coming in just looking for relaxation. There's quite a bit of, meditative work you can do. OCD, ADD, and reactive attachment disorder. And that's just to name a few. There are other things that we've been able to work with people on. But just as far as some of the uses. Really quick, I'm going to switch to a different slide deck here. I wanted to go over what is brain mapping versus neurofeedback. A brain map is called a QEEG brain map, and neurofeedback is the training that happens from the map. So this is my kind of like semi-decent example is if you get on Google and you were to get a map of the city, you kind of know what you're looking at and what components of the city are there. Then you're going to press for the directions, so you might reroute, and calibrate. So it's two very different processes. They seem similar and they go together. This is probably a better example that I like to use with clients. If you go to a chiropractor, oftentimes you need an X-ray because you need to kind of see what's happening in the body. Why is my back, so tight, or why am I leaning this direction? And from that information, they're able to manipulate, stretch, or train bones or muscles, or even use operant conditioning to kind of teach people how to, maybe it's this little reminder, okay, 2 times a day, I need to move over to the right, or I need to stretch my back this way or that way. So there's the training and then there's the map. I don't know why, but that took me like 3 years just to really get that completely separate, because there's a lot of, letters. There's an EEG neurofeedback, and then there's QEEG, quantitative EEG brain map. But just for our purposes, there's a brain map and then there's our neurofeedback training. I plan to kind of try to touch on both of those today, because there are people that just do mapping, and then there's people that just do neurofeedback. And then there's some people that train off the brain map. So it's kind of differences across the board, but I want to talk about both, and both also have certification boards. So there's a separate board for brain mapping than for neurofeedback. Okay, so I want to say a quick thing about the slides I'm going to share with you. I'm going to start off with QEEG. Oops, let me get rid of my other thing here. The slides I'm going to show you were actually a courtesy in our neck of the woods. I call us the neuroscience nerds. We help each other. So this is a presentation. I just want to give some credit. It's Jan Ford Muston. Actually, she had way lovelier graphics than me. I started writing or making it, and she just already had it pretty well done. So but I actually called and talked with her, and she said, anytime you want to use my slides, you let me know. So this is actually her slide deck. She is in Austin, Texas. And for some reason it is giving me a hard time. Okay. So I want to talk about this. So she's got great slides, and then she has really funny pictures. So we seem to be like a small pool of people. So when you call, everybody's like so helpful. We just have a really helpful community. So I want to start off with the map. Remember how we talked about map and then there's training from the map. So this is referred to as quantitative electroencephalography. Encephalography. I still have a hard time saying that. It's a mouthful. But for short, it's EEG. The QEG is really rather painless and non-invasive. That's what really drew us to it. There's nothing going into the body. There's nothing that's, people are walking out with all of these, kind of strange abreactions or whatever. It's just a passive reading. The scalp is prepared and measurements are calculated. Typically, like at our clinic, we use 19 points or 19 channels to record. So we record all across the brain. A stretchable elastic electrode cap will be slipped onto someone's head, and then all of those little spots there are recording electrodes, and then we fill them with water-soluble contact gel. So it's just like if you go get a sonogram, there's a little bit of gel that goes in there. The one thing I wanted to mention about this really quick is that in the days of old, they just used to like super glue those to your head, and you'd have all those wires. And a lot of times too, they were doing sleep studies, so they have to keep the wires in place. But this cap actually is so brilliant. It looks like a swim cap, but it keeps all those leads right on them. We've really come a long way. And there's just like a little disc underneath. And then there's a little wire and it goes up to the kind of the rainbow colored wires. Those are all the wires from 19 channels. So we've really, I think, come a long way in the ease of the recording. Brain waves are then recorded onto a computer while the client is relaxing. What's industry standard is with eyes open and eyes closed. And we can talk a little bit more about that later, but I think that actually comes from neurology. It's 10 minutes eyes open, 10 minutes eyes closed. Recordings is what's standard. Then these brain waves are compared to a computer library of brain waves from medically, neurologically, and psychologically evaluated normal subjects. So this is pretty advanced software. So biomedical engineers create all of this software. They also create a lot of the engineering for medical products. So they know what they're doing. They use a lot of algorithms and pretty precise standards to gather data. I love these kind of silly old pictures. This is not quite what our systems look like anymore. A little bit old school there, but I thought the pictures were kind of funny. We tend to have those evaluated against normal subjects. So there are a whole bunch of databases different universities have, different private centers have. Some of these we've actually lost track of in the field. So somebody's made a brilliant database where they've collected data and maybe they've passed on. And so certain people had keys to that database, but you can't really buy keys. So some of the old school people have access to like a lot of different information. But for our purposes, we run ours by a pretty standardized database. And then we have the ability to send out our maps to about 7 other databases because each database has its pros and cons. And the database does a lot of the work for you. So we can come back with reports that say, your 3 standard deviations, outside of the norm for, this or that, for example. So something like ADHD, sometimes this can really help with formulating a diagnosis. So if you're 2 to 3 standard deviations outside of the norm, we've often, like anybody who's kind of dove in this pool, like the theta to beta ratio, if you're really outside of normal with that particular combination, there's a high chance that you have ADHD. And there's other subtypes of ADHD, but the databases in and of themselves, they have entire classes on them for days. So you can almost get lost. And the different types of databases. People are building new ones, but a lot of our major universities have different databases. I know NYU is one that we use just to kind of gather, information, but it's really neat. And a lot of people are using those for, kind of a normative database, in order to give input and feedback about brain maps. So just a little bit of behind the scenes there. So this is one of my favorite things to talk about, a little bit of why these maps are able to be taken is the human brain really has kind of like real estate. So there's not a lot of us at all that have, different parts of our brain that do different functions that are like different. I suppose you can always get some like really strange situation, but our temporal lobe is always here on the side. Our frontal lobe is, right in the front, responsible for thinking, planning, executive function, mood control. Our parietal lobe right across the top here is involved in somatosensory. The occipital lobe does all kinds of stuff, and it's at the back of the brain. And then we have the parahippocampal gyrus, which is short-term memory and attention. The anterior cingulate is really important for a lot of the work that we do. It's involved in volitional movement, attention, long-term memory, and then sometimes we see OCD and addictions. People with addictive behaviors sometimes come up with pretty high standard deviation differences in that area. So it gets endlessly fascinating. But Brodmann is actually a gentleman that I think he spent most of his scientific career just labeling, you see all the little numbers on here, every little piece of real estate in the brain, what each little area does. So this is what we refer to as Brodmann area. So if you see 10, Brodmann area 10, that's a pretty popular one here, is in the frontal lobe, right at the very front of the brain. That might be an area that we train when we're looking a lot at, let's say mood control or executive function. But each one of these areas, if you dive in, has its own little, like job. And that's just endlessly fascinating that our brains are all kind of set up the same. So that's what we're recording and getting information about in some ways too, underneath the 19 sites. So if you take this, the parietal lobe, somatosensory, well, somatosensory, if we think about that, is probably going to be involved in things like ADHD, or one of the things, because it's a sensory problem, right? So we could get a lot of information from the parietal lobe. But we're really also getting a whole bunch of measurements across the brain. They're pretty complicated, but I just think the Brodmann area thing is really interesting. That gentleman, Brodmann, I think spent his whole life mapping the brain, and we still use the Brodmann areas. He was pretty accurate, and I wanted to say it was in the 1800s. And I think he spent 40 years mapping the brain. So Brodmann areas are a big part of, our process. Next, I want to start to talk a little bit about what we're measuring in a map. I'm going to be honest, the first time I heard this, honestly, even the 5th and the 10th time I heard this, my eyes rolled back in my head. I was not as much of a like math and science girl. So whatever you can kind of take from this, like, or extract from this, don't feel like you have to go 10 miles deep. Like, I'm still learning, as far as some of these things. And George is on, so if we get to questions, he actually probably can dive a little deeper with you guys into absolute power, z-scores, etc. But one of the things that we are measuring is what's called absolute power. Any of you may know from statistics that z-scores are kind of like distance from standard, right? Or standard deviation. And deviations may be telling us that if somebody's really deviating from a normal, someone who is not ADHD, compared with someone who is ADHD, well, they're probably going to be 2 to 3 standard deviations or z-scores, a difference in z-score from the norm, right? And we're kind of just looking, this is a high level explanation, but we're just looking at relationships between various brainwave frequencies. So those are kind of all these squiggly lines. The computer is doing a lot of the analysis. and then we're getting the reports out and going over them. There's another thing that we're studying called relative power. I like these maps because they're so colorful and
Tim, sorry, can I interrupt just for 1 second? There's a
sure.
little like gray box that's covering some of the words underneath the colorful part. I don't know if that's one of your
Is this here? You mean on this slide or on all of them?
on all of them. It just like is staying put. So I don't know if it's one of the, oh, what do you call it? Like a control thing or something? I don't know. That if you're not
Okay, is this
seeing it, then it's okay. I'm gonna send the slide, so.
okay? Okay, sorry about that, guys. It
Oh
looks
gosh, no
all great
worries.
on my end. Um, let me, if I just pull this up off the bottom, is it better? Just out of the gray square?
Yeah, that works. That works.
Okay, okay, I'll be aware here. You guys didn't miss
Thank
too
you.
much. Sure, yeah, no, thanks for letting me know. I can't see anybody, so just pipe in and tell me stuff. Okay, so this is I I don't want to go like too crazy on this, but if you see all these squiggly lines here, these are actually measurements between the points on the head. So this says FP2-LE. So that's FP2 is a site, and then linked ears is an electrode that's more of a ground. This kind of uses, in a sense, electrical concepts. Your brain is actually an electrobio battery, and it's moving around in gears. So if you're sleeping, your brain kind of is, we're seeing delta, and that's kind of like a simplistic version. But I wouldn't worry too much about any of those things. But basically, each one of these little lines is an electrode site, kind of like looking at their little diagrams and stuff. But all this one had said was just that Power Z scores examine many relationships. So just for today, we're kind of just doing an intro. So that was kind of the point of that one. And then I love these kind of colored maps, right? The first time I saw them, I thought, oh my God, what does that mean? But they're actually, we get map reports like this. And one of the things that we can look at is relative power, which would answer the question. So these are just different mathematical things that we get from the maps. Relative power is a measurement that talks about is performance potential restricted because some brainwave frequencies are deficient or other frequencies excessive. So that's what your trained clinician will spend a long time looking at these, creating reports. You don't just get a report back and you're ready to roll. You actually study them, look at it, or you have somebody do that for you. That if we break down what that's saying, I mentioned delta wave, right? So if you're sleeping, you're going to see a lot of delta. Well, if we see delta during the day while you're sitting in our chair, wide awake, well, we've got a problem, right? Like we're wanting to look at why is there so much delta while you're just sitting pretty, awake and alert. So that would be an example of deficient or excessive. You should not have excessive delta during the day. I would expect a lot of delta at night when you're sleeping. It's kind of the sleep wave. If anybody's ever taken psychology and they talk about the delta alpha theta, like the brain waves, right? So relative power is doing a bunch of measurements to basically look at that. So if you're alert during the day, you should see a lot of beta wave, which is you focusing, thinking, task performance. You see a lot of slow wave. That's what's really common for ADHD. If you look in the DSM-5, it actually says, it's way down in there. I just saw this and missed it, that ADHD is a slow wave brain disorder. So half the time, if you're looking at a brain map, your ADHD people have slow wave. So they have a hard time sustaining attention because their brain is moving in a slower wave, right? Those things were endlessly fascinating when I kind of learned about that. Relative power. Oh, this is just a great Great 1970s photo. I thought it was funny. Um, she's really a hoot. The lady I got the slides from, she's really, really fun. Okay, so another measurement that we are that we get back. These are pretty industry standard, relative power, absolute power, asymmetry. Those will be a lot of the measurements. I'm giving you guys a little bit behind the curtain, like what we would be looking at. So this is called asymmetry. So it's a measurement where we're looking at the voltage and differences between brain areas, and we answer the question, are electrical impulses in these regions excessively high or deficiently low for good performance? So a way I like to explain this, if something, let's say the left side of someone's brain is kind of moving slower. Let's say they've had a TBI, a traumatic brain injury. They've had a concussion. Maybe one side is moving slower, like at the contact point where the TBI happened, and then the other side is kind of operating at normal speed, or let's even say faster. That asymmetry, the differences there can really lead to some deficiency, and then you can actually see lower performance in different tasks. Depression is actually typically seen as an asymmetry. So we see that where the left side has lower voltage than the right side. And I'll double check all that with George, so I'm not telling you guys wrong. Like when we get to we're going to do a little break after these slides and before we go into neurofeedback for questions. But that's a measurement we're looking at. How is the brain? Is it going faster in one part than on the other part? Or is it asymmetrical? Because sometimes we should be seeing, let's say you're awake and alert, and we see delta all over the left side of your brain and beta all over the right side. Well, that doesn't look right. That doesn't sound right. So this, and obviously in this map here, we're seeing like little measurements, like on this first, brain map, it says delta. So they're taking a look at delta wave. They're separating that out. And as you can see, this person, usually the red is like higher standard deviations above. So maybe this person's got kind of this real interesting, a little bit too much delta here. Sometimes too, that can also be they're moving. Sometimes if they're at the front of the brain like that, somebody might have just been moving their forehead or their eyes a bunch. So you don't just take a map and say, okay, you have a lower delta in the left hemisphere, there's something wrong with you. Like you want to really take a look at the raw EEG and put it all together and take a look at it. But okay, coherence. This is the fourth of 5 things that we look at. So I'm just, again, giving you guys behind the curtain what you look at when you're putting together a brain map. You look at all these different things, and then the databases also give you all these results. So coherence is kind of a mathematical, I want to say like output that you get from a map. But what it does is it analyzes how much energy the brain is sharing between different areas. Coherence answers the question, how efficient is my brain's ability to communicate with itself? We see sometimes coherence issues where like, I'm gonna use kind of like a real simplistic version, but sometimes people with ADHD, we know the front of the head and the back of the head, they just don't quite communicate well. They don't have good coherence. The reason for that is the frontal cortex is executive functioning, all of the things that you're thinking about doing. And then sometimes the back of the head are all about, being able to execute or bring that to life. So that's why sometimes people have trouble. It's like the front of my brain is not talking to the back, and it's not pushing me to complete an activity, or I'm just blurting out something that I'm thinking instead of sort of combining that with, front and back of the head functions, right? So coherence is just kind of a, how are we all talking across? I like to think of it as coherent speech. Am I speaking coherently? Is my brain speaking coherently to itself all across? Phase is the fifth bell of the ball here. And it measures the speed of the electrical signals moving across the brain surface. Phase might answer the question, is the brain's energy moving at the optimal speed for adequate to superior performance? So we sometimes see that the electrical signal is moving a little bit slowly. You could see that with probably like a traumatic brain injury, or sometimes a stroke. So we want to see that, the electrical signal makes sense, right, with what we would see and expect in a normal brain. Topographic maps. This is just another report we really just get. The maps answer the question, are brain frequencies and patterns appropriate for the task? So are the proper brain areas engaging to yield maximum performance? So these are the topographic maps. We're just getting like this really big kind of printout. If you see up here, just to dive into the weeds with you guys for a minute, it says 1 hertz. It's really small, but I'll just tell you 2 hertz, 3 hertz, 4 hertz, 5. I don't know if you remember from psychology class, delta wave is from 1 to 4. So when you're sleeping at night, you're going to see this wave moving from about 1 to 4 hertz. That's how you know you're in delta. So they're basically like breaking out the waves, like different brain waves, and kind of looking at them to get different ideas. I actually tried to staff this with somebody, this blue spot in the middle. Because what, technically speaking, that would mean if you see this little scale underneath here, you see the blue is -3, which means 3 standard deviations below. So I'm not sure why this would be 3 standard. So this is kind of a cool, like you're seeing more quiet activity right here. And that could be, sometimes we see things like a loose sensor could do that, where it just have this kind of strange kind of spot like that across all the waves. But maybe I'll ask George too what he thinks. I like looking at their actual pictures, try to figure them out. Loretta Z scores. We have been kind of getting on board like more sophisticated software. So we now have something called Loretta that has an ability to kind of see the brain more 3-dimensionally. Back about 20 years ago, we really could just see the raw EEG. Like in a couple slides back where I just showed you all the squigglies, and then you could get information from that, and then it would go into like kind of a 2-dimensional little report, like these like kind of scatter plot looking things. But our technology is improving where you're able to really like get a 3D sort of model of the brain. And it's kind of building that based on like vectors, like it's getting all that information by sending signal through and then kind of putting together a 3-dimensional concept. I'm probably very much not giving it the time of day that it needs an explanation, but there's literally like Loretta Z-score training classes that are 4 days long. So I'm really just doing my best to give you high level on this. But the perspective is more from deep within the brain. And it might just kind of give us some really neat insight. Like, let's say with this picture, we see this little blue spot here. And then let's say we go back to the Brodmann areas idea. This looks like it's in the parietal sensory motor area. I was going to say maybe Brodmann's area or Wernicke's area, which is language. But you see how you might kind of see what's in the real estate. So this looks, quite a bit, many standard deviations below, it's kind of like a slow spot here. But that is my very, simple version of that. Another thing that we can test for, we don't do this with everyone, but for a lot of people, it's very helpful, is the traumatic brain injury and severity analysis. It's very complicated exactly how they're calculating this, but we can actually run a test for a severity of, TBI probability. So it's just a probability that, your scores may place you in a moderate range of severity. That's helpful for some of our clients. They're like, I've taken a couple of big hits to my head playing football, or and I'm not sure, I never like saw any major differences, but there could be some, connectivity problems. So if you think about it, your brain is really inside this bony skull. And so if you get a hit, say you even hit the front of your head, sometimes our brain kind of moves around and it's hitting that, the spiny, hard skull that it's in, and you can get little injuries or even throw off the connectivity to like front and back, for example, if it was a kind of a frontal TBI, like the hit came to the front. But we do work with neurologists, like if it's a TBI, master's level clinicians, we're not neurologists. So we actually have a lot of neurofeedback friendly neurologists that we can work with. One gentleman is named Dr. Rusty Turner. He's been in the field about 45 years. He's amazing. So we can actually oftentimes send our reports to someone like Rusty that can kind of advise us, or he knows neurofeedback too, so he may be able to counsel us, or he may say, oh, this person really needs to go, work with their neurologist. So we've got our scope of practice here. Like we don't treat medical issues or neurological issues single-handedly, but we may get some support about what kinds of training could be helpful. So these are just kind of different things you can get as far as reports. Learning disabilities. This is kind of a neat analysis. Some of our learning disabilities we can really see those as brain-based, things like dyslexia, dyscalculia, some of the disorders, learning disabilities with words. And again, this is using a lot of algorithms, math, science to kind of capture the parts of the brain where those learning disabilities show up, and then they show that they're either, excessive or not enough power. There's a lot of different things that could kind of show up to help us rule out learning disabilities. Strangely too, people with learning disabilities can throw off a brain map, because a learning disability is just something that is. But if you have, let's say, dyslexia, we're seeing kind of this spot, and then it looks like, wait a minute, like, why do they have, so very little alpha brainwave? But it could be, we have to kind of take that into account too and understand that. And some of those learning disabilities you can even do training with to help people improve. Dyscalculia, dyslexia, stuttering is something we've seen people for too, that they want to give it a go, see if that can benefit them. Spectrum brainwave analysis examines various frequencies and regions over time and answers the question, does this brain switch to a new task in an appropriate and inefficient way? I don't have a ton of spectrum brainwave analysis charts that spit out with our stuff, but it's just a lot of these things are just about data analysis. So it's just different ways that things are being presented. So it's like pie chart, or the spectral analysis just displays the information a different way and gives us like a neat way to kind of look at things. I won't go like knee deep into a spectrum brainwave analysis chart. Couple of things too. I mentioned this earlier. Excessive slow waves with relatively deficient fast frequencies reduce our ability to focus and pay attention. So I'm now going to talk to you a little bit about what we're looking for as far as what shows up in people's experience. So excessive slow wave, if you think about what that means, it's a sleepy brain. So if you have excessive slow wave and you're deficient on faster frequency. So I mentioned this quickly earlier, but if you have beta brainwave, beta is what you're going to see when you're in a task. If you're reading a book, you're going to probably see, hopefully, a lot of beta. Well, guess what? Our people with slow wave disorder, or ADHD would fit into this. They have a hard time focusing and paying attention. We're going to see a whole bunch of theta wave. We might see slower waves, and then the deficiency of more of that kind of focus frequency, like the beta. So that would fit a lot of our ADHD clients. Excessive fast frequency. So we're just seeing, a lot of frequencies that are, we talked about slow with the ADHD, and then fast, what you're going to see is a deficiency in alpha and theta. So those are slower waves. and it may increase anxiety. So if you go to the other extreme, if you see somebody who has beta and high beta, so their brain's like moving, they may actually feel, they may be your anxious types. When you ask them about how they're feeling, that's how anxiety may show up, as well as PTSD, because we know you get kind of an overactivated anxious brain. I mean, that's what happens when we have PTSD. We talked too a little bit about unequal brainwave energy between the two sides of the brain, and it may restrict our ability to think clearly. And then also, this is where depression tends to show up. You have unequal brainwave energy between right and left brain. I went down a rabbit hole trying to figure out exactly why this was, or why does one side make the other side, like how does the asymmetry make someone feel depressed? And I just simply don't know. It just seems that one side of our brain's kind of the happy side and one kind of the more moody side. So interesting stuff. If you want to learn more about that too, it's called asymmetry, alpha asymmetry. If you want to just Google that, or some info about depression. So if someone has depression, we would upon taking a map, you may see that they've got that asymmetry is what comes along with depression. And then you can actually train it. Sometimes if you can train that unequal brainwave energy, well, people's depression, it feels like it lifts a little bit, they get better. And, I'm oversimplifying it because I think there's actually 12 different subtypes of depression. Not everything's, like a one and done. Excessive coherence. Remember, we talked about coherence earlier. It can produce a lack of differentiation in certain regions and could indicate a mild head injury from birth trauma or stroke. So just like a conversation, if two people are talking and they're talking coherently, they're understanding. But if they're talking too much, too fast, and not correctly to each other, or excessively trying to communicate, you actually just get a communication problem. So, ooh, there's a little more. Probably take a break in just a minute for questions. Uh-oh. I lost my slide. Where did my slide go? Sorry about that. Sent you guys on a loop there through the PowerPoint. Okay, so EEG characteristics. I think they're starting to kind of summarize a few things here. I'm going to go a little deeper into these. So EEG characteristics are graded for performance efficiency in 4 categories. So I'm just summarizing all that we just went over: relative power, asymmetry, coherence, and phase. I'm going to remind you guys again, please do not feel like you have to grasp these concepts right now. I mean, I think I took feverish notes the first 4 classes that I took of EEG training, and I came out feeling like I had no idea what I was doing. And so it just took some kind of studying and understanding. But those, I think from a high level, it's just good to know, here's the kinds of things that are being looked at on a brain map. Here's the kinds of things we're looking for and how they relate a little bit to mental health disorders or things that people are experiencing, TBIs, even like stroke, different things that can show up. Topographic brain maps will answer the question: are brain frequencies and patterns appropriate for a task? Are the proper brain areas engaging to yield maximum performance? There are a bunch of people working on, I think you're calling it event-related potentials. There's a lot buzzing around with that right now. So if you're in the middle of a task, there are certain things that we should expect your brain is doing if it's operating at optimal functioning. So if I'm doing a mathematics problem, I would expect the parts of my brain involved in numbers, maybe my frontal cortex, my executive functioning would be involved in the task. And then we're kind of seeing what happens as people are sort of building up to beginning the task, and then the task is completed, and then it kind of like crescendos into you finished doing the math problem. So there's a bunch of people kind of studying that right now, but what we're looking at is there are people, are the proper brain areas engaged? You know, maybe you go to kind of focus on something and you defocus, and we would be expecting you would kick into beta wave, right? And maybe start to kind of engage in a task, but then your brain kind of goes into theta, which theta is the wave right before you're about to fall asleep. So then we would kind of be wondering what's happening with attentional ability. So what I did described there too is more like an ADHD person. They're going to kind of attempt to read something, and then their brain is going to get blood flow to the frontal cortex, and then they're going to quickly drop into theta. So that's why people with ADHD, they tend to focus, and then it's like the battery drains, they can't think anymore. And then even some of the hyperactivity is just compensation, overcompensation, right? We're trying to get the brain to wake up. And that'll pull the brain out of theta a little bit, some of the excessive movement. So there's a lot going down too right now with ADHD studies. But it's pretty interesting stuff because it is a neurodevelopmental disorder. EEG characteristics are graded for performance and efficiency in these 4 categories. Again, this is relative power, asymmetry, coherence, and phase. So if you're a QEEG brain mapper, you're going to hear these 4 things over and over and over and over again. Relative power, asymmetry, coherence, phase, and then you'll hear another one, absolute power. So those are your main bells of the ball when you're getting your reports back. Again, we talked asymmetry looks at voltage differences between brain areas. It answers the question, are electrical impulses in this region excessively high or deficiently low for good performance? Magnitude, which is the energy of each frequency group at the 19 electrode sites, and the relationship between the brain's various frequencies are calculated for efficiency. I wanted to pause here really quick too, because I think this is really interesting. So this is an EEG. This is the raw EEG. This one actually looks like it's done by, like, the really old school ways is they would have pens, right, that were going across the paper with ink. I'm not sure that that's what's happening here, but it kind of looks that way. But you see, just for fun, I'll show you guys what raw EEG is. See here we have FP1, FP2, F3, F4, C3, C4. So these are all the corresponding electrode sites. So these 2 are at the front of the head, FP1, FP2, F3, F4. That's all frontal. C3, C4 is across the top. P3, P4 across here. O1, O2 is at the back of the head. F7, F8 is at the front. T3, T4 are at the sides. So basically, they just have an interesting way they're kind of laying these out. And then what you're seeing on the map here, they're measuring magnitude. How big are the waves? You think about going to the beach, how big are the waves, right, that are coming down the shore? I remember I went to Hawaii once, and the magnitude of the waves are definitely huge. They're coming in hot and big and powerful, right? So that's the idea of magnitude. One other quick thing, just to nerd out, you see how there's like a big dip here in the, I guess where it says between 400 and 800 down at the bottom. Anytime you have something all along all the different electrodes like that, it could be like, I thought, oh my gosh, what's happening to this person? It could be something like sweat. You know, if there's what we call sometimes a salt bridge, but if you're seeing something against all the electrodes, sometimes that's what we call artifact, which may be somebody moving, or you know, there's just sometimes sweat will throw off the recording. So we actually remove those whenever you see that in a recording, because it's not actual EEG. It's somebody maybe moving, or they're you know, an electrode can get funky. In this case, it would be at every single electrode site. So anyway, we're doing stuff like that too, kind of taking data out that's not part of the real record. Caudate nucleus. So I'm going to talk just real quick, because just have a couple more slides. I always like to go over neuroscience. I feel like I can never get enough of it. It's always good to end on neuroscience, right? Let me just try to go over these like just kind of minimally. I did almost prepare too many slides. I want to possibly to do some questions and be able to go over the neurofeedback slides as well. Like, how do we actually train once we get the data from these maps? So I want to kind of go over that too. I think these I can just mention some things. The caudate nucleus. So one of the things that they make you do when you're getting, or I shouldn't say make you do, but you get to do when you're getting a certification in bioneurofeedback is you have to take almost a medical grade medical school brain science and human anatomy course. I thought I knew a lot about neuroscience, but I walked out of there feeling like I need to start over. I was like, oh my gosh. So there's things like caudate nucleus. I don't think I had ever fully heard of or understood what it did. But the caudate nucleus is very important. It's an element of the executive system of the brain, and it receives input from the whole association cortex of the brain. So the reason why they kind of pivot and start talking about some of these things, these are areas that we can start to kind of like get a sense that there's some trouble here, and then we can start training, and you can actually kind of train whole areas. I'll talk more about on that later, how to train, networks or areas. But this is a really important part of the brain for mapping. And it receives input from the whole association cortex. That's ability to kind of bring words together, concepts, ideas, incoming sensory data. And then we have specialization of cortical areas for reading and hearing. This is kind of neat because this is a PET scan. So there's a lot of different types. And they did kind of confuse me at first. There's PET scans and CAT scans and SPECT scans. There's all these different scans, but this PET scan here is not something that we're doing. We're doing the QEEG brain mapping, which is to take the raw EEG and computer-based create a map from it. A PET scan here would show, though, this is more like kind of things you'd see in like a psychology book. The left shows two areas of the brain that become particularly active when volunteers read words on a video screen. The primary visual cortex and an additional part of the visual system both are in the back of the left hemisphere. This is like endlessly interesting for me. So seeing words and hearing words are found in two different parts of the brain, and they're both kind of noticed on the back of the left hemisphere. I have no idea why our brain is set up the way it is and why things are where they are. It's just really fascinating. Other brain regions become especially active when subjects hear words through earphones. So you're going in, literally a PET scan, you're going into a medical office, and your brain is being, I don't want to say x-rayed, but you're getting, data back as you're doing a task. And so they're just showing where different things live in the brain. But as you can imagine, if there's dysfunction in these brain areas, that's where we might see things like learning disabilities. Some of those kinds of things will show up on a QEEG because we're seeing there may be slower wave, or in this case, they're showing you a healthy experience of seeing a word, hearing a word. So damage to these areas. So there's functions of cortical visual areas. Activation of V4 in the brain is it's back here in the back. I'm not sure if you can see my arrow, but you can see V4 labeled at the bottom helps us with the perception of color. Damage to V4, and we end up with achromatopsia. Probably saying that wrong. Some of you probably know those words better than me, but Inability to see colors, color blindness. Activation of V5 is motion perception, and damage to D5 or V5 would be achinotopsia. God, I'm bad at these words today. So those are people, they actually have trouble with motion, like understanding and perceiving motion of objects. So why they're getting into this is, the brain's got real estate. And so we are able to kind of, it's really like a sleuth hunt. You're getting the data from the map, and then you're knowing what kinds of things show up where in the brain, and you're really putting your sleuth hat on and kind of figuring out what kinds of things are coming up. And there's a lot to look at. The occipital lobe, we have problems often. If we have problems here, we have defects in our vision or visual field, difficulty with colors, identifying colors. So that's kind of, it's called color agnosia. You just can't really, no colors there, but you can't say what it is. Production of hallucinations, visual illuminations, like inaccurately seeing objects, word blindness, inability to recognize words, difficulty in recognizing drawn objects, inability to recognize the movement of an object. So these are just kind of a lot of the difficulties if you have a damage in the occipital lobe, which is in the back of the brain. Difficulties with reading and writing, damage to one side of the occipital lobe can cause loss of vision with exactly the same field cut in both eyes. A lot of the studies that they learn about problems with brains have to do with people unfortunately having injuries, because we don't obviously perform experiments on live people, but we learn a lot of where things live based on damages or people that are willing participants after strokes, or to be able to kind of study where in the brain do things live, and what kinds of problems come up. Temporal lobe, we have problems associated with damage with faces. So there's an area for you to recognize faces of other people. I just thought that was kind of interesting. It's an actual real estate area. Difficulty understanding spoken words. Some of us know the Wernicke's aphasia. You just don't understand words that people speak to you. Disturbance with selective attention on what we see or hear. Difficulty with identification of and verbalization about objects. Short-term memory loss, long-term memory, increased or decreased interest in sexual behaviors, cannot categorize objects. Right lobe damage can cause persistent talking and increased aggressive behavior. So I don't think we need to kind of go through all of these. I'm sure if you've taken a class in school, there's a lot of just different things of, memory, where we have memory loss, prefrontal cortex, working memory, and you have my slides too, if you just kind of want to read them over. I don't think I'll have time to go over each and every one of these, but these are the kinds of things we're thinking about is, where do these difficulties show up? Here's the kinds of things that happen from strokes or TBIs. So there's a lot that goes into a map for us. Let me stop here with questions, and that way too, I can hopefully at least hit a little of the neurofeedback slides. I don't think I have nearly as many of those. So let me do stop share. It's always good to end with neuroscience, right?
Let's see. I'm just going back to where did I see questions? Okay, I think that's the first one. Is brain mapping or neurofeedback covered by insurance? What are the going rates and how many services are in the valley for it? Is the first question.
This year is the first time that I saw people's insurance plans with an actual benefit. I've had 2 clients now that have come in and said, I have a full benefit for this. And that is not common because we don't have a ton of research. Research is there, but insurances are always reluctant with services. like we went through that with EMDR, if anybody remembers the EMDR times, they were a little bit like, this is experimental, and we kind of went round and round. So they're becoming more and more open to it, which shows that they're starting to become more confident as the research is coming out. So that's my super long answer on that, but I'm starting to see it in plans. We do have a lot of clients that we submit out of network, and I call the insurance first and I explain what we're doing exactly. I just believe in full transparency. Like, here's our team, here's exactly what we're doing, here's the map. And so I want to say about 60% of people do submit and get some coverage back, mostly out of network. The map actually is I just showed you, there's kind of a lot that goes into it. Like, sometimes we go over the maps for 7 days, and we may send them out 2, 3, 4 times to other providers, depending on what's happening. So that is a little bit more than just the traditional cost of a therapy session. But what we do is we do a kind of a free map reading session. A lot of providers then have you come in and charge to go over the map with you, but it's just kind of all inclusive. So for our mapping services, it's $650, which I think is on the low end of what most people charge. A lot of people will go up to anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 just for the map. But we're kind of trying to be user friendly. But we try to always make it approachable. We've got a couple of zero interest loan. We have a couple of people too that, they're like, I can only do 200, but I'd like to give, 200 more next. But we just kind of work with everybody. And we've had a few people get really creative. They somehow I'm not an expert on this, but school funding or with the neuro and biofeedback, some kind of funding where they're able to get support. So anyway, we kind of chase down all avenues with people. If we can submit to insurance, we do it. Some people have gotten, coverage from different things. We also offer discounts if people buy packages. The session, ESA, thank you. I could not think of it. I'm having word agnosia today myself. Yeah, so I mean, we tend to figure it out with everybody because we work with a lot of our office is weird. We have little kids, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is half our lobby. And then we have this adult dealing with trauma in their 50s. So it's we try to kind of work with whatever we can with people. We really try to be good steward of their resources. But yeah, it's definitely something we hope to see more coverage for, because right now it's pulling teeth a little bit, but that's across the country usually. Most other providers we talk to, it's a mixed bag. And we're really careful about billing to make sure that we're billing for exactly what it is that we're doing. I've heard of people doing things that are, they're like, well, whatever. I did it in a therapy session, and it depends on the insurance. You have to really make sure that they're okay with that and that is correctly billing, because nobody wants a piece of that. So anyway, I'm going to try to hurry it. It was a very good question. Also, how many people in the Valley do it? I would say,
oh, sorry, I forgot about
3. I know most of our providers. I want to say there's 3 or 4 that I know really well. I don't think a lot of people go down the super nerd hole of the QEG brain mapping. There may be more people too. There are some really proficient people in Arizona. I don't know what it is about Arizona, but there's probably 3, 4 really good mapping services here.
Cool.
Good question.
In the interest of time, it's 1:11, we have till 1:30. Is there any way that either you or George, whoever's not going to be talking, could answer the questions in the chat and in the Q&A?
That's a great idea.
Yeah, because then that way you can get
George
on
can
with the
take
neuro
it.
feedback, but I don't stress over somebody not getting their question answered. Does that work? Yay! Okay, cool.
100%. I
All
think
right.
George would love that.
So
And
keep rolling.
George does he actually is our tech. So he's sitting with everybody. So he's got really good boots on the ground, give you guys info.
Yeah, he has, oh my gosh, his brain is whoa. He tried to explain it and I was like, Cool. All right, go ahead.
Yeah. And we do also offer behavioral health counseling as well. I was just going to mention that. And I do all my EMDR, IFS, brain spotting. I do clinical hypnotherapy. So I kind of do everything. That's usually why I'm not as much in the neuro office. I'm over on the other side of I'm saying other side, but like our offices are next door doing, a lot of the therapy stuff. So we do just about every therapy there and CBT and all the regular stuff. It depends too. Some people are wanting that. Some people are just, and we are always kind of making sure it's best for somebody to come. And some people we really recommend that they have a therapist on board, not just neuro, because it depends on what they're there for. Can you see this okay? There's like kind of a funny orange square happening, so
Yeah, it's just that little kind of
still there, huh?
weird box. I think it's probably just your Zoom controls, but I don't know how you get rid of those. So no
Oh,
worries.
that's so annoying. Trying to think if I'm afraid to mess with things and make something weird.
Yeah, I say just leave it for now. And then I told everybody on the slides, they'll be able to double check all that.
Okay. Yeah, sorry guys. I was like really proud of my IT. I've been like doing good on IT stuff here. So I'm not sure what that is. I'll have to look into that. Okay, so I want to now talk on the other end of the house here. We do have, I want to say 10 to 15% of our clients come in and they just do the brain map. They just want to know their map. I have people that come in that they're like, I just want to know what my map says. Like it's endlessly fascinating. I actually have a map on my screen. I don't know that or desktop. I don't know that we'll get like a ton of time to look at when we might, but it might just show you. We do have these neat little reports and people. It's just endlessly fascinating to look over your map. Um, but I would probably say a good majority of our people are coming in because they want to train. They want to find improvement. We have a professional golfer who wants help with focus. We have a lot of people that are doing this in combination with trauma therapy. We have a couple of really interesting, we have a few people with endometriosis, like an unending, just horrible experience of just the brain continues to send pain signals. Actually, we've got a couple people that it's chronic pain and it tends to like be helpful with that too. We would do a type of neurofeedback called infraslow, which is more cutting edge where we do whole brain network training. So we can do pain network training. So anyway, so let me talk. Your brain is your greatest asset and invest in it. And EEG neurofeedback is brain training. So we kind of went over this. This is the electroencephalography. Oh, like that's always such a hard word for me to say. Neurofeedback. We're getting into the kind of the training end. We've already done the brain science stuff. So we know where everything lives. As one of my mentors says, it has real estate. It all lives in certain places. Notice here, you see the little dots, T5, T3, C3. There is what's called a 10-20 system that all people that do brain mapping know. So if I call someone and say, well, it was, putting on a cap and I noticed there's a problem at electrode FP or FZ, another neurofeedback provider will know what I'm saying. And there are 19 of those, but that's the 19 channels that they're recording from. When you become aware of your own breathing, hand or foot temperature, heart rate, or muscle tension, you can change it. I don't even know how to give this the kind of like appreciation that I can. I think this stuff is so neat. It's like our brain is basically a learning and a meaning making machine, but it has such a desire for economics. So if your brain is in a very PTSD kind of a state, it does not usually just wish to stay there. So If you are able to give your brain or your body a little bit of feedback, it can then get the information it needs to sort of like course correct or figure out what it needs to do. So that's why people have a TBI and we can help train them. They tend to want to train their brain back to being able to concentrate or, see images clearly, right? Your brain just kind of wants to return typically to where it was, or if it got really knocked off with PTSD and you're in a lot of high beta wave, for example, that's not the most economical setting for a brain. So we start kind of training that down a little bit. People are like, oh my gosh, I can concentrate better, I can think. But the brain just frequently doesn't have feedback for itself. So for example, if you could put on a heart rate sensor, you could track your own heart rate, and then you could kind of like speed your heart up or slow your heart down. Same with breathing. If you became aware, say you used a breathing belt and you were like, oh gosh, I only take like 3 deep breaths a minute, now you have the information. So your brain does that with neurofeedback. It's really a form of operant conditioning. Your brain typically loves it. Most people are kind of like, God, it's so fun. I came out of there and I, was able to like maybe focus better. And because there's a lot of very smart biomedical people that create software and medical devices, they have found ways to actually take the data and create a game with it. So take, for example, this young man here. So we may be training him to relax, let's say. So every time his little brain starts to relax, his little spaceship shoots forward. Well, you're going to want your spaceship to move forward. Like, I don't know if you ever tried to play a video game and you can't get your car to start in the game or whatever. But basically he can kind of control that spaceship with his brainwave of being able to say, oh, I just want to relax. And then the spaceship will move. It's really cool how they do it. People much smarter than me at like engineering, software and how they kind of create um, the actual training programs. It's not always video games. We have a video game suite and it really takes the feedback and then it can make, it more user friendly. Our newest, latest and greatest is we have dimmer screens. So if people want to bring in a television show that they like, when you're off course and your brain is off from what we're training, your screen will go dark. So if you're watching your favorite show, it's opera conditioning. You don't want your show to turn off. You want your show to stay on, right? So that gets a lot more people through the door that are, that you kind of get to watch your favorite show, although it fades in and out if you're trying to, help somebody train on it. So, but we've got a bunch of different things like that, as well as just the actual screen itself has feedback. Some people like that. We have meditation video things, like there's a lot of ways to train. Changing brain activity is a type of exercise. People actually kind of feel tired when they leave. Like even sometimes, like especially our ADHD people, we're helping them to concentrate and come out of slow wave problem, right? They're having trouble, like they have a sleepy brain. So we're helping them to kind of open up and learn to get the cerebral blood flow to their frontal cortex and help them stay online. So they're like, oh, I kind of feel like I exercised my brain. Sometimes they're tired, but we start retraining it for you to stay in beta brainwave when you're trying to focus. And then they get a lot better with their attention. Here's all the things your brain regulates: attention, mood, behavior, anxiety, response time, sleep, empathy, anger, obsession, self-talk. Basically, those are all the things too that, because it's all brain-based, we're helping your brain kind of in any of these areas. I know it's 1:21, so I'm just going to kind of hit some key points here. Let's see. I kind of told you about how it works. All of these problems are psychological, substance use, learning disabilities, violent behavior, poor social skills. We see that too. There's a lot of stuff with like a reactive attachment, right? And so neurofeedback is really a viable option to kind of help help that brain kind of become more coherent. Sorry guys, I'm just kind of skipping through. Better regulation, improved performance. Most people walk out feeling better attention, more control over behavior, and increased resilience. We tend to see changes in the EEG because we're starting to help people say be in the kind of the correct brain waves for where things should be in their brain, and they tend to feel as though their brain is working better. And they can, like, let's say, concentrate better or feel less depressed. We already mentioned this. This is just, you'd have a therapist monitor. This might be whatever feedback your client decides they want. Our young people, they only want to play video games. That's usually all they want to do. But the thing is, you're not going to get somebody in there, under age 10 with like a meditation screen and get them to come back. They're going to just be a little more interested in space race. And we have one called Brain Cats. These cats race against each other. Here's what you're going to see if you have a therapist screen. This would be for like another day to kind of like dive deep into the inhibits and rewards and how we're actually operantly training. Let's see, reducing excessive slow. We talked about reduction of slow brain waves, like if someone has ADHD. We can see a comparison of brainwave. There's normal EEG versus excessive slow or fast. So look at the waves, like waves on the beach, right? These are going really long and slow or too fast. And then this is what a normal would look like. I'm going to skip all these things. We already talked about operant conditioning. We've got delta, theta, alpha, SMR, beta. That is an incorrect slide. Somebody threw that in twice. And then high beta. So what I just went over is all the brain waves. That's a lot of what we're looking at when we're looking at these. Delta is when you're sleeping. Theta is when you're distracted. Alpha is when you're kind of relaxed but spacey. SMR is calm. Beta is when you're kind of like focusing. High beta is when maybe you're stressed out or in high arousal. This is all history stuff. Started off with cat studies. And then they figured out that they could help with seizures using neurofeedback. You can make seizure resistant cats. So we really started off with a lot of studies on epilepsy and seizures. And then probably the strongest research right now is ADHD. And it proved to be just as successful and helpful as stimulant therapy, except that it continued to sustain, whereas when Ritalin's removed, all of the results attenuate. The couple really good studies, and you guys will get these slides. So just different neat research things if you want to take a look at them. TOVA is a test that they use for attention. It's really common for ADHD. And here's some studies like pre and post. That's how they're saying, did neurofeedback actually help you concentrate? Because the TOVA is a test where you click when you see something, and then they measured errors of commission or omission. So ADHD people tend to make a lot of errors, right? Because they're having trouble attention or keeping attention. All the different things neurofeedback is good for, and then your brain is doing all the work. And then just some resources. There's a lot of, here's a bunch of studies. You guys will get those. And the key points are your brain changes itself. And when the brain works better, the individual functions better. So I'll stop there. I always overdo the slides just in case. But that'll leave us a few minutes.
Yay. Did you talk about your practice?
No.
Okay, talk about your practice, because then that way, and we may need
Okay.
to schedule a part 2 for this. I feel like there's so much information still.
So much.
Talk
I
about what
actually,
you do.
all right, I'll do it in 1 minute. How about that? And then that'll give us some time. So, we run a state-of-the-art neuro and biofeedback and brain mapping practice in Tempe and Scottsdale, Arizona. We are self-proclaimed neuroscience nerds. We love it. We love helping people. That's our mission, is to make it like approachable to just as many people as possible. We are kind of mom and pop. We're not trying to just kind of sling people in and out. We take somebody's case and we take it like a sleuth. Like we try to go through everything, bring in all the right parties and players, and we love it. We just love helping people. So we see everything from, autism, ADHD, sensory, people that want to do maximize performance. I have somebody that I talk to that's working on math skills, sharpening their focus to take math tests. So that's a lot of what we do. And you guys kind of heard my bio. Like, I'm just trained in a lot of different modalities to be able to use them together. So that's my 1 minute calling card.
Very cool. Yeah, this is incredible. I went to the office and saw the equipment, and it is just, it's crazy. Like, I still don't understand how the thing works with the game. Like, I still don't understand that, but one of these days, like, he's explaining it, and I'm like, okay, I get that it should work. I just don't know how your brain like knows it, but it's amazing. Oh my goodness. Thank you guys so much. I know George was working diligently answering all the questions in the chat and in the um question and answer. I'm looking to see if there's anything else that maybe didn't get answered. Uh, you do offer behavioral health therapy. You answered that. Are there accommodations or certain brain scanning tools for kids who are autistic and may be leery of this new experience?
Are you talking about like clients that have the caps on, or just leery in general, or?
Yeah, maybe like, so think about a kid who had autism, and like that would probably freak him out in some ways. So maybe that.
We
Yes.
saw this in the chat as well,
Okay.
in the question and answer portion, and answered it, but just
Oh, perfect.
to
Sorry.
touch on that briefly. Lots of kids, and particularly kids with ASD, it's about, this is unpredictable. This is, and so this is can trigger dysregulation, um, sensory overload, or they can get overwhelmed. We find that kind of rehearsing it beforehand, even practicing with mom or dad at home. Okay, this is how the cap goes on. I mean, literally, we'll coach them to do some of these things to sort of prepare the child so that they're not overwhelmed in the experience and can tolerate it. And we find that that's been highly effective. So, Kim, if you have anything to add.
The only thing I was going to add too, we have some neurofeedback types of things where you don't have to do the cap. You can actually just do some of the leads too, if that makes them feel better. But I would say definitely like the rehearsal too. And I've seen George work with some, like I said, more difficult cases where they're like biting their teachers, and he was able to really, I think it really requires some, calmness and some counseling skills, to support them. But it's not for everybody. Anyone that comes on and says everything's for everybody is just simply not true. If you have somebody, a kiddo that just was like, no, I'm not doing this, then maybe there's something else. We're not the only thing in the whole world, right? But
Oh, exactly. That's one of my favorite sayings. Like, I love Aurora. I love what we do, but we don't do everything, and we're not meant to do everything. So thank you guys so much. Is it okay if I'll include your website, of course. Is it okay if I include your text messages? Goodness. Your email addresses with the CEU slide, so that way if anybody has any more like focus questions, they could reach out to you.
absolutely. We love questions. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for being here today. If you are interested in part 2, please email me and I'll get that out to you. Or I'll get with Kim and George and set up a part 2 if you're interested in that. Otherwise, watch for your CEU certificates. They should be arriving. My goal is by the end of the day tomorrow. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you guys so much for taking the time out to present. It was awesome and amazing, and I definitely understand it a little bit better now. So
yeah, definitely, like, if anybody's walking away like, oh my gosh, like it's definitely, we're like 10 years in and I still feel like I'm missing things. So it's perfectly normal. So
Cool.
the work in progress.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Get out and enjoy our last probably cool weekend before the heat. So thank you, everybody. Bye.